Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. I just wanted to say that you are part of an audience that is growing with every single show. And I can't say thank you enough for listening and for telling your friends. I would encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. It's free. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher Radio and SoundCloud. We are part of Public Radio Exchange, prx.org, and we've got our own webpage at wfae.org. We're 20 episodes in. This thing is real, and you are part of it. So thank you. All right, on to the show.
Well, someday I hope that my dreams come true. I sit around and pray, but it ain't no use. And sometimes I wonder why I fought so long for a feeling that cuts to the bone. Well, my heart
Vivian Howard is the chef at a restaurant called Chef and the Farmer, which has recently helped put the small eastern North Carolina town of Kinston on the map. You may not have been to the restaurant, but it's likely that you've seen Vivian and her husband Ben Knight on their Peabody Award-winning show, A Chef's Life. It airs on PBS and features the day-to-day operations of the restaurant as well as local farmers. This was a life Vivian knew. Her dad was a tobacco farmer. But farming wasn't the life she wanted, and she says that for as long as she could remember, she always wanted to leave. So she actually lived in New York for a while. We'll get to that later. But to begin, I asked her what it was like growing up in eastern North Carolina.
So what's interesting is that I did not grow up in Kinston. I grew up in Deep Run, which is about 30 minutes outside of Kinston. And
Is that, okay, Deep Run, 2 words?
Deep Run. That's the name. That's where I live now. And Deep Run is next to Pink Hill. And I went to school in Pink Hill.
Very descriptive places. You know, they're telling you exactly what's there. There's a deep run in one place, and there's a pink hill in another.
And there's not a hill in sight. It's like the flattest country that there is. But so I grew up in Deep Run, and it's about 30 minutes outside of Kinston. And it's funny because when we went to Kinston, we said we were going to town. And we would get dressed up, and it was a big deal. And I grew up with this inferiority complex about the people who lived in Kinston. Deep Run, all of the surrounding areas really subsisted off of the tobacco trade. Either you're a tobacco farmer or you worked in the tobacco business. I grew up barning tobacco every summer. And with a big garden in the backyard, pigs and cows and the whole deal. And then in the, I'd say, early 90s, late 80s, the tobacco trade kind of started to shrivel up, and the tobacco buyers that came in and spent a lot of money every summer, they no longer came to town. People stopped farming tobacco. All those little small family farms that were maybe 20 to 40 acres shriveled up, and the economy of the whole region really just dried up completely. And so I now live in Deep Run, and I work in Kinston, and I no longer have the inferiority complex, and I don't say I'm going to town anymore when I go to work.
Talk to me about cooking. I mean, what drew you to food? Was that something that your mother, your grandmother did, or your dad or grandfather did? What was food like in your house? Was it a big deal?
I did not grow up at my mom's hip cooking. My mom has really severe rheumatoid arthritis, and she has since she was 16. She's had 2 shoulder replacements, and my childhood is a dotted memory of her having surgeries over and over and over again to correct some issues. So she cooked, but it was very minimal. It was like the absolute minimum that she could do to get by. My grandmother, her mother, was an excellent cook. She really focused on vegetables. That's what I remember her cooking. And, she was an organic farmer before there was organic, the word. I remember playing in her compost pile a lot. So I'd say that we all loved to eat, and my dad being kind of like a community leader, people, and someone who was seen as a money lender, people always paid my dad in food. So I remember Saturday mornings I would wake up and there'd be a big bowl of barbecue chicken on the table that we would eat off of all day long, and that was from someone in the community who, gave my dad barbecue chicken every weekend, probably because he owed him money. And same thing with, vegetables from people's gardens, preserves, canned things. So there was always a lot of really good food around. It just necessarily was not prepared in my house. But I don't know where I always loved to eat, and I loved to cook, and I played restaurant as a kid. Like, actually, I played cruise ship waitress.
You have to tell me what that means. What is cruise ship waitress?
I don't know, now that I can reflect on it, I think it meant a lot of things. It meant that I wanted to be on a cruise ship. And I deemed that extremely, enchanting. And I got to call my own shots. But I really don't know. I think I watched The Love Boat a lot, too.
What then gets you to food? What then gets you to actually learning how to prepare it and how to cook and cook on a completely different level?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer, and it's something that I excelled in school, and so my parents really, pumped it up and said, you're good at this. So I always thought, I'm going to be a writer. I am a writer. I mean, I'm great at this. And so when I moved to New York, I was seeking out that for myself. And as it turned out, it was a lot harder to do than it was in elementary school. And so I had waitressed, not on cruise ships, but I had waitressed all during college at places like Sticky Fingers and Rockola Cafe. And so I had a little bit of experience there. And so I was working in advertising. I was really unhappy. And I quit, and I went down all these kind of paths that I'm glad I didn't stay down. And I was on my way back from an interview at Hogs and Heifers, which is a biker bar in the meatpacking district where you dance on the bar as a bartender. I went in for the interview, and they yelled at me, get on the bar and dance. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't think I can do this. And I got up there and I started clogging because I grew up clogging. And they were like, oh my God, you're amazing. Come back at 5:30. And I walked out of there and I'm like, oh no, so if I take this job, it will be a game changer. I will be going down this very definite path. And so I'm walking back to my apartment, and I see this sign that says now hiring, and it was for a new restaurant, and it's called Voyage. And I walked in, and the owner looked at me in the eye, and he just hired me. And it turned out that the concept of the restaurant was Southern food via the African diaspora. And the chef became my mentor, and I was a waiter, but I started working in the kitchen for free in my time off. And I was just so interested, not so much in necessarily the preparation, but in his storytelling and the stories behind the food and all of the information that he had, and I was just fascinated.
Storytelling is a theme that will reemerge, but at this restaurant Voyage, she met her husband Ben. She started cooking there and then went through a culinary program in New York, and then she worked in restaurants up there for about 3 years. She and Ben started a catering business out of their apartment that specialized in soups, and it got so popular that they began looking at commercial spaces in Manhattan where they could move the operation. And they went home to North Carolina over the holidays to tell Vivian's parents all about the plan.
And my parents were like, oh, no, you're not. No, we don't want you to stay there. That was like me really putting down roots and And so they said, they just never thought that that would happen, because I'd always been like flailing about, And so they said, we would like to help you open a place here, anywhere in North Carolina. Just commit, move home, we'll help you do it. And I was completely against it.
That's a real serious decision to have to make. You'd spent so much of your time getting away from this place for whatever reason, but you wanted to do something bigger, and now all of a sudden you've got a very tempting offer from your parents. It's your family, and it's back home, and they're going to really help you to do what could be a dream, but you just said you were fighting it.
Yeah, I didn't want to do it. I didn't even really consider it. But Ben, my now husband, he grew up in Chicago and in a twice broken home, and he went to North Carolina, and my whole family were like all up in each other's business and very close and functional and dysfunctional all at the same time, and he was drawn to it. And he said, I really want to move here. I want to do this. So I warned him, this will not be what you think it is. It's great for a weekend. It's great for a week, but you'll struggle here. But for whatever reason, when we returned to New York, it was really bad weather. We had like the boot on our car or something, and just a series of events convinced us that it was probably the best thing to do. And I always blame him for it. And I will continue to do that because that's what a good wife does, is hold something over her husband's head.
And so now, even though things are flourishing, that's still is that still what you say, or what do you feel?
First of all, moving back to North Carolina has been the best thing that's ever happened for us. But it's just a little joke that we have. I always blame Ben.
So Vivian and Ben moved down to eastern North Carolina, and in 2006 they opened Chef and the Farmer in downtown Kinston.
And I was really very interested in changing the face of the community via agriculture, because I saw all these no more tobacco farms, and I felt like, on a 20 to 30 acre tobacco farm, you can make a living. You cannot make a living growing 30 acres of cotton. So I felt very strongly that these farms could transition into niche produce or proteins or cheeses, and I wanted to be a part of that transition. So we set out with the goal of, buying everything from local farmers that we could, and it was really sparse in the beginning. But over the course of 8 years, there's a lot of people with small, niche produce, protein, cheese farms in eastern North Carolina now, and a lot of them kind of grew out of what we do, and they sell to us now, and then they sell to a bunch of a bunch of restaurants in the Triangle. But so I think that we are making an impact in eastern North Carolina, at least.
How have you seen Southern food and even eastern North Carolina cuisine? How is that? Can you define that for me and define what you're actually doing with that at the restaurant?
The definition would have a whole bunch of words, when we first opened, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have like a style, and I was really cooking bad versions of other people's food that I'd cooked in New York. And then 2 years in, my dad called and said that he had found blueberries for $1 a pound, and he was going to bring me 500 pounds. And you just don't say no to my dad. And so I said, okay. So we ended up with these 500 pounds of blueberries and absolutely nothing. We didn't know what to do with them. So I made a blueberry vinegar, and from that blueberry vinegar, I made a blueberry vinegar-based barbecue sauce, which is reflective of eastern North Carolina style barbecue sauces. And I made blueberry barbecue chicken, and it was familiar to folks in eastern North Carolina, but slightly different, like with 20 degrees off. And people just really connected to it. And it was like the first time our community and people from outside our community could get on board with what we were doing. And I thought, oh my God, okay, so I'm just going to kind of like translate the food I grew up eating using the sensibilities I have as a chef. And so while I can't define Eastern North Carolina food, I would just say that I do the food that's familiar to me in my own way.
As I said, Vivian is now starring in her own show on PBS called A Chef's Life. So I asked her how that got started.
So I've told you that I always had this strong desire to be a storyteller in some way and a cruise ship waitress. I still haven't realized that dream. I've never been on a cruise ship. So about 4 years ago, I was invited by my neighbors to make collard kraut. And so on like a really cool November morning, I went to my neighbors, and in their back shed, I made kraut with collards with 4 60-plus-year-old men, and the whole time we're doing it, they were explaining the folklore surrounding it. Like, you cannot make collard kraut, according to them, when the Farmer's Almanac says the moon and the stars are in the sign of the bowels, and they've been using the same seed for their collards that make the kraut for over 100 years. They only use well water for the kraut. Women do not help when they make the kraut. So they had all these rules and regulations, and I just left that experience completely electrified. For one, I thought that I knew everything about Southern food at that point, and certainly Southern food in my backyard. And I just got the sense that there was so many more stories within Eastern North Carolina that I had no idea about. And so I went home and I started talking about it. I wrote a blog, like the first thing I had written since college. And I told Ben that I really wanted to kind of like on video document some of these things, like making collard kraut, or something like putting up corn, which is something my family did when I was growing up, but people don't really do anymore. And so I talked about it for like 6 months, and he said, you should really call your friend Cynthia. So I had this childhood friend, Cynthia Hill, who grew up in Pink Hill. And she was a documentary filmmaker. She made a film called Tobacco Money Feeds My Family, and it's really about tobacco and the region and the good and bad things surrounding the industry. And he said, just call her and see if she knows someone who will help you. So I called her. I told her my idea about telling the story of Eastern North Carolina food through the lens of the ingredient, and if she knew of an intern or somebody that would help me. And she said she was interested in helping me. So we started. She's like, okay, we're going to come down with our cameras and we're going to experiment.
So they began filming. They were documenting Vivian and Ben's life as well as farmers in the region. In each show, they feature an ingredient, say sweet corn or strawberries, and they profile a farmer who grows it. They show the traditional use of the ingredient, and then they do something modern with it through a cooking demo. They made 13 episodes and began shopping it around, and eventually, PBS agreed to air it.
The show really spoke to programmers all over the country, I think for a lot of different reasons, and they aired it in really good times, and I think it made a big difference for us.
What do you think it is that is so appealing about the show? I mean, I know you're in the middle of it, but I also have a good feeling that you've had conversations about why this show is so good and is so popular.
Well, I think it's real. I think that it's honest. It's weird for me being in the middle of it and trying to figure out why it resonates with people. I think it's really good. And one thing I've noticed is that it appeals to all walks of life. I have, left-wing, super radical folks that love the show, and then I have right-wing, like ministers that reach out to me and love the show. Children, 6-year-old girls identify with me for some reason, and really old folks identify with the show. So there's an element, I think, that we have hit on something that mainstream media does not, in that it's not sensationalized in any way. We call on the wisdom of older folks a lot, which you never see on TV. I don't know. Why do you think?
I would say the same. I think the authenticity is what reads really well. And I can remember watching the first few episodes and you describing that, just what you said, calling on the wisdom of older people. Coming from a media background, I know that a lot of the times when we were creating stories, coming up with story ideas, the default is that you find someone who is young and beautiful and charismatic, but would be very attractive, and you may let the people who are not as attractive go, or not necessarily as young, because the thought is that a younger audience is going to be attracted to someone who looks like them in that respect. But I think I found the same thing that you did, and frankly, a lot of what I'm doing with this podcast is the same thing. I love having room for, because your show does this too, I love having room for people who are young and charismatic, beautiful like yourself, but I'm also interviewing people who are in their 70s and 80s and who have, great stories to tell from that perspective, and they're not the next hottest thing, but they do
a lot of knowledge and information and wisdom that we don't have, and no one's listening really. And that's been making the show. That's been my most favorite part, and the thing that I will take away are the things I've learned from older folks.
I think too that you are yourself in the show. I don't get a sense that, as a viewer, I don't get a sense that you have taken on the character Vivian at all. And that reads, especially when you're with some farmers who you may have worked with for years, but that translates.
Right. And I think that is because Cynthia, the director, is my best friend. So I can be really, I trust her, I trust Rex, I trust everyone in the production. So I'm just in myself. And so far, it's been okay. I have not let anyone know about my cruise ship waitress dreams yet. But
this is the big debut for that.
Exactly.
What is inspiring you today?
I don't know, I'm really struggling to find out what my place and my role is at Chef and the Farmer now, because with the show and I'm writing a cookbook and I'm doing all these things that take me out of what I've done for 8 years. I used to get up at 8 a.m., go to the restaurant, be there by 9, cook all day long, set up the line, work service, go home, go to bed, and get up and do it all again. And that's what I did, and that's how I honed my craft. That's how I drew inspiration. I read cookbooks, I read menus, I dug into my craft, and now I'm doing so many other things, it's hard to focus. So I'm inspired in a lot of other ways, but I'm hoping that a lot of chefs go through this thing where they kind of flail about for a little while and not really know what they're doing in their kitchen.
And it's hard because of all these opportunities that are now knocking on your door. It really is hard to say no, and it's hard to not be distracted by it because the potential for a lot of these things is big, right? I mean, a cookbook like this that is big, being featured in Southern Living magazine, being featured in other national magazines. These are their own mini game changers that are happening. And you're right. I mean, you can't it's not a get into the kitchen and make the best thing that I can make, and at the end of the night.
I mean, we've been scratching and clawing our way to this I feel like opening a restaurant in Kinston, North Carolina in itself was like hard. And, we scratched and clawed our way to, little moments. And now that I'm invited to do certain things, and I'm not going to say no so that I can spend the day in my kitchen. And also, I'm a mother. I have 2 3-year-olds, and they are way cooler than anything that I'm doing. I just want to be around them all the time. And so, I don't know, my focus is just all over the place.
It's a challenge because I can imagine that you and Ben, in the beginning, you had to have had a vision or had to have the desire for it to make it the way that it has. And now that it's actually making it, I wonder, do you think now what? Now what is the next thing? How does it get bigger?
I don't know. I feel a lot of responsibility to not let people down. It's like our whole community, my family, they're just like so thrilled for us and so happy, and it's like they're almost getting more out of it than I am. And so I just don't want to disappoint anybody, and I want to make the most out of all these experiences for the greater, I don't know, for everybody else.
For everybody in Deep Run and Pink Hill and Kinston.
And on my cruise ship. I mean.
Well, it has been a pleasure talking to you today. I really appreciate you meeting me.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
So what should I do when my love goes away? I sit around and cry and beg her to stay. I try and get along now the best that I can. Hope she returns with my heart in her hand. There's only one thing I know that's true. There's too much of me and never enough for you. There's too much of me and never enough for you. Oh, what if I only knew? There's too much of me and never enough for you.
I would like to thank Vivian Howard. Again, her restaurant Chef and the Farmer is based in Kinston, North Carolina. And check out her show, Chef's Life. It airs on PBS, and you can watch back episodes at pbs.org. The special music today is by Durham, North Carolina-based band Red Leg Husky. Hear more from them at redleghusky.com. As always, the Authentic South theme is by Chris Hoke and Brett Estep. And to see pictures of Vivian and to hear other episodes of the show, click on over to AuthenticSouth.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. It's free. Remember, it's on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and SoundCloud. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We are at Authentic South. Until we go south again, thanks for listening.